Joshua fit the battle of Jericho. Joshua fit the battle of Jericho, and the walls come tumbling down. Up to the walls of Jericho, he marched with a spear in hand. Oh, glory, bring Joshua cried, because the battle lamb in my hand. Joshua fit the battle of Jericho. Jericho.
This isn't working. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. There you go. Okay, thank you. Yeah, what time are you ready to start? I think it's about 7. Yeah, 7 o'clock. So let me just turn this off. Is this her original music? Yes, it is.
Hello, good evening, everybody, those present in church and those online. This is the last Friday of our 8-week series, the Fall Adult Faith Formation series, Vibing with the Venerables. And I thought I'll just bring this to a conclusion before Dr. Cecilia Moore concludes her presentation on Thea Bowman. So this was a very, very intentional series. Particularly in the people that we chose to reflect upon, and also the people that we invited to reflect on these men and women that we have reflected on in the past 8 weeks. 2 of the people were mentioned by Pope Francis during his visit to the United States, and that was Dorothy Day and Thomas Merton. And we had Archbishop Oscar Romero, and then Sister Thea Bowman. And I deliberately chose these 4 people because their contribution to Catholicism and the Catholic life, especially in the contemporary period, and what I mean by that is many of these people have now died, none of them are still living, but they help us to have modern, contemporary conversations around very important Catholic themes. And now particularly with Sister Thea Bowman, where Catholicism and racism intersects. It is such an important part of the conversation that the church needs to have. I was listening to her conversation, a reflection from last week, and how Bishop Toole forbade people from participating in the civil rights movement. And you think about these days, there are bishops that are saying that you cannot officially use Black Lives Matter in Catholic conversations. And so we are not beyond some of the struggles that these men and women have faced in their lifetime. The struggle of Archbishop Oscar Romero, or the worker movement with Sister Dorothy Day, or the struggle for peace with Thomas Merton and his reflection. And so we deliberately chose these men and women, and we deliberately chose the scholars that have spoken about these. Every one of them has given us such enlightened reflections and helped us to move forward with our own Catholic living. I've never had a class with Cecilia while I was at UD, but I heard her last talk just today, and she's such a delightful presenter. There's a sincerity and a joyfulness that comes through her presentations. And where do we go from here? I do not know. I know that in Lent, I'm hoping to do a 6-week presentation on Francis of Assisi. So we're going to go really back to the 12th century. Kind of deal with the medieval church and how the church was rebuilt in those days. So, but that's a suggestion, it's not a promise. We'll see what happens with that. But here we conclude today the 8-week series on Vibing with the Venerables, and I hope that the 4 people that we have reflected on, men and women, and our presenters, mainly women, have been able to enlighten us in our own Catholic living. So once again, I hand over to you, hand over the microphone and this presentation to Dr. Cecilia Moore. Welcome again.
Thank you, Father, for inviting me and welcoming me back. I see some people who were here last week, so I'm happy to see you all again. Thank you for coming back. And also, I see we have some new people in the audience tonight, so welcome to you. Tonight is more on the spirit. It's about the spirituality of Sister Thea Bowman, and I will just say that I feel much more comfortable doing biography because I'm a historian, I am not a theologian. So spirituality is not really my strong suit. However, Sister Thea Bowman wrote and spoke and did so much teaching that it became a challenge for me to decide what aspects of her spirituality to present tonight. So I picked, but at the end of the talk tonight, the last slide has a lot of the books that have been written about Sister, biographies. I have articles there, and also audio of Sister, videos of Sister. So there will be ways for you to learn more about her life, but also more about her spirituality, if that is something that you wish to do. So I'm going to start with, I think, what is, central question if we're dealing with spirituality. My understanding of spirituality is, how do we relate to God? How do we relate to God? How do we experience God? And Sister Thea had a lot to say about who God is. And I have this passage here that is Sister Thea answering the question, who is God? Using her own experience, the experience of her people, and their music. If you're someone who knows much about the African American experience, particularly religious experience, this litany, if you will, of Sister Thea's comes from a lot of different songs, spirituals and gospel songs that are central to the Black religious experience. So she says, God is bread when you are hungry, water when you're thirsty, a harbor from the storm. God is a father to the fatherless, a mother to the motherless. God's my sister, my brother, my leader, my guide, my teacher, my comforter, my friend. God's the waymaker, the burden bearer, a heart fixer and a mind regulator. God's my doctor who's never lost a patient, my lawyer who's never lost a case, my chaplain who never lost a battle. God's my all in all, my everything. If you just take a look at who she says God is, we see that she starts with God as sustainer and protector, and then she moves into God as our family, the mother, the father, the brother, the sister, and then those people in our community who we have relationships with, like our teachers and our friends. And then God is a problem solver. And at the end, God is everything. Sister Thea said that she would use this litany herself daily. And she said that these are images. And she said these are the images that come to us from Scripture and from the meditations of Christians. And that she herself would choose one of these images of God on a particular day and a particular time. So she's was always meditating on these aspects of God. God who is food for us, God who is friend to us, God who solves our problems, God who is everything. And she said these reflections, these meditations on God made her feel closer to God. One of the writings of Sister Thea Bowman that is especially celebrated is an essay that she wrote for the African American hymnal, Lead Me, Guide Me. I talked with you about Lead Me, Guide Me last week. This was a project of the Black Catholic community. They wanted to have a hymnal that they could use in their churches to praise God, using music from new music, but also the spirituals and gospel music from their tradition. And Sister Thea contributed to Lead Me, Guide Me, an essay called The Gift of African American Sacred Song. I see some of her spirituality reflected in what she has to say in that essay. She says, African people are diunital people, seeking richness of meaning in apparent contradiction. They are comfortable bringing together realities that may appear contradictory or in opposition. For example, body and spirit, sacred, secular, individual, community. They reach toward the unification of opposites. In West African philosophy, that idea of having these oppositional ideas, things that seem like they're contradictions, is very important because this is how we achieve a sense of balance. We need to have these oppositions, and we work with them all the time. And she highlighted in her text apparent. These are things that seem like they're in contradiction. And I think she wants to say that's just an appearance. These things that we think of as being opposite from one another are together. We should understand them to have a unity. And she says, this is why God is mother and father, sister and brother. This is why God is like fire and also balm. Also in this essay, this I think is also important for the spirituality question. She talks about the first person pronoun, meaning I. And she says in African American and African cultures, I is always communal. It's always communal. It's a communal reference. The individual, she says, sings the soul of the community. In heart and voice and gesture, the church, the community responds. So when I speak not just for myself, I speak for all of us. I speak for the community. Sister Thea, in her lifetime, would be called to speak for the community over and over and over again. So that understanding that when she stood up to speak, that she was representing her people, that I think is something that is really important for us to understand about who she was and how she saw her call. These are some remarks that Sister Thea made when she was celebrating Black history at a church out in California, St. Columba Church. The occasion was the feast of the presentation of Jesus in the temple. And in that set of remarks, she wanted to talk about the significance of Africa and Black history. The first thing that I pulled from this particular writing of Sister Thea was this statement. One of the most moving things for me is the realization that my sisters, mothers, and fathers in Africa recognize Black Americans as belonging to Africa. These people received me warmly and went out of their way to help me experience their culture in its various forms. I am grateful to them for making me realize in a new way that I am an African American. Last week I talked about how Sister Thea had the opportunity to go to Africa twice, and both times it was after she had been diagnosed with cancer. And on her first trip, she went to Kenya, she went to Zimbabwe, and she also went to Nigeria. On her second trip, she went to Tanzania. And so she's talking about, when she's talking about these moving things, it's a realization that my mother's sisters and fathers in Africa recognize Black Americans as belonging to Africa. She's talking about that real personal experience she had when she was there in Africa. She's talking about her memory of the warm reception and their desire to help her to understand their culture. About the time that Sister Thea had this experience, this is in the mid-'80s. First time she goes is in the mid-'80s, and then in 1989, the year before she passed away, she went back for the second visit. That's about the time that we started using the term African American. African American. I'll just say this. When I read this, it made me think about my own life. And when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, and when we would have to do projects in class about our heritage, I just remember always feeling like I didn't know enough about my heritage to do that sort of project because I didn't know much about Africa. And so this experience that Sister Thea has going to Africa and having the people who welcomed her in Africa see her, recognize her as being an African, how transformative that was for her. And she says here in this passage, I was grateful for them making me realize in a new way that I am an African American. That, I think, is an experience that a lot of Black people want to have. We want to have that experience. We want to have a sense of understanding where our ancestors came from and how we are connected to them. And we also want to have a feeling that that is our home, as well as this place, America, is our home. She moved from her reflection on Africa to talking about Black history. And she says here, Black history has given the world Black men and women who could work. They worked for freedom while they were treated like slaves. Our history has given us Black men and Black women who could build. They built a sense of Black dignity, even when society denied their worth. In their memory, we present our humanness and we give thanks to God. Here we see her identify freedom, creativity, and respect as being things that Black people have given to the world. I love here where she says, they worked for freedom while they were treated like slaves. That, again, I think was a turn in consciousness for a lot of people, because, again, I remember growing up learning that my ancestors were slaves. And understanding that somebody was a slave is a different understanding than growing up understanding that they were enslaved. They were not slaves. They were people whose freedom was taken from them, and they were put in that condition. But that's not who they were. That's not who they were. And I think Sister's saying this here. We present our humanness, and we give thanks to God. And then the last part that I took from this particular address of Sister Thea's is our history has given us Black men and Black women who could tend to the wounds inflicted by evil. They could mend a broken heart. They could hang onto a battered woman. They could overcome rejection. They could look beyond prejudice. They could find new strength in the face of adversity. In their memory, we present the legacy of Black life, and we give thanks to God. There are like many, many passages in this text where she is talking about what she sees in Black history, and at the end of every reflection of what she sees in Black history, she offers this memorial to our ancestors. To be Black is to be able to, and to more than just being able to, it's to be required to be able to heal wounds, to mend broken hearts, to take care of people who have been beaten, to figure out how to overcome rejection. How do you look beyond prejudice? How do you do that? That's something Black people have to do. They have to find strength in the face of adversity. And she says, that's our legacy. That's what our ancestors taught us to do. And so that's something that we keep. That's something that we keep, and that's something that we pass down to our children. Okay, last week we had a question about Sister Thea preaching. And so I was like, I gotta talk about Sister Thea and her preaching it. I really feel I must. So, here's Sister Thea talking about women in the church. She starts off talking about her childhood. And so she says, when I was a little girl in Canton, Mississippi, I went to those old Black churches. And I learned what they called the old-time religion. I wanted to grow up so I could be a preacher. That's what she wanted to do. That's what she wanted to do when she was a little. She wanted to grow up so I could become a preacher. Now, Sister Thea was well aware that Catholic women could not preach in the Catholic Church. She said, quote, I can't preach in the church. Women can't preach in the Catholic Church, but I can preach in the streets. I can preach in the neighborhood. I can preach in the home. I can preach and teach in the family. Now she says can. She says can. I can do this. I can preach in the street. I can preach in the neighborhood. I can preach in the home. I can preach and teach in the family. So that means I have the ability to do that. She also said, if you are a baptized Christian, you have the responsibility to preach. So responsibility and ability are two different things. There's a lot of things I'm able to do, but I don't do them. The things that I'm responsible to do, I must answer for if I fail to do. She believed that we all were supposed to preach. We all were supposed to preach. That's part of your baptism. That's part of your responsibility, becoming a member of the Christian family. She also went on to assert here that preaching done at home gave meaning to what the priest, quote, proclaims in his official ministry in the pulpit. So in our homes, we should be preaching. We should be preaching. It assists the priest in what he does up here in the liturgy. That's something we do to help the priest. We're not going to watch Sister Thea's address to the U.S. bishops. There's a link to it that I believe has gone out to you in your email. So I encourage you to listen to it. I listened to it again before I came over tonight. And Sister Thea talked about this before the bishops. And she said to them, we know that a lot of the best preaching doesn't happen in the pulpit. She said that to them. And a lot of them laughed because they know it's true too. She also said to them that, you know, we say if we go to church and we don't have the sort of experience that we think we should have had, she said, we'll say, that liturgy didn't do anything for me. But she said, the real question is, what did you do for the liturgy? This preaching, this witnessing, this testifying that all Christians are called to do is supposed to prepare them to be there in the liturgy. It's a relationship. It's a relationship. She also, in this writing, which was focused on women in the church, she asked people to think about the women in their own lives. She asked, did those women preach? Did they testify? Did they witness? I think implied in Sister Thea's question is, if we have to answer that question with a no, then we've missed something, that we've really missed something. We're missing something. If we've never heard a woman preach, if we've never heard a woman testify, if we've never heard a woman witness, we have missed something really important. Okay. All right. This is from a text that was produced by the Office of Black Catholics called National Office of Black Catholics Families, Families, Black and Catholic, Catholic and Black. And in this, Sister Thea had an essay. And again, I just took a small portion of it. She says, the Black family is alive and well. It assumes further that we as a people need to find ways, old and new, to walk and to talk together, to bond more surely, to extend family more widely and effectively, so that no one is fatherless, motherless, sisterless, brotherless, so that no one lacks the self-sustaining human support of family. Remember last week when we were dealing with Sister Thea's biography, talked to you about how Sister Thea was an only child, born to, at the time were considered elderly parents. She was brotherless and sisterless. She was brotherless and sisterless. I also talked to you about how Sister Thea left her work as a college professor to come home to Canton to take care of her parents when they needed assistance, as they were elderly people and their health was giving down, and she went home to take care of them. Sister Thea became motherless and fatherless in the midst of her own becoming aware that she was that she had cancer. So this experience of actual brotherless, sisterlessness, motherlessness, fatherlessness, sister lived that. She experienced that, but she also believed that the biological family the biological family is important, but that's not the most important family. That's not the most important family. We create family when we reach out to people and we provide them with the with the fatherliness that they need, with the motherliness that they need, when we become brothers and sisters to people. She says that is essential. That is self-sustaining, and that is what we as human people are supposed to be doing for each other and in our communities. And we've got to figure out how to do that. There are some old traditions that we can turn to, but we also need to create some new ones. To bond more surely, to extend family more widely and effectively. I do believe that Sister Thea felt that because of the history of African Americans, which was for a long time an enslaved experience, African Americans weren't allowed to have their biological families. Children born to parents could be taken away at any time. Your children really weren't your children. They belonged to your master. And so when slavery was over, so many of the formerly enslaved people, they didn't know where their biological mother or father was. They didn't know where their biological siblings were. Wonderful stories about people, once they became free, who set out to find them, set out to find them, and in some cases they were able to locate them. But just because you didn't know where your biological family was, didn't mean you couldn't have a family. You created a family. And so this whole idea of fictive kin, that's big in the Black community. We all grow up with all of these aunts and uncles and cousins who have no blood connection to us whatsoever, but they are our fictive kin. They become our aunts and uncles, they become our grandmothers, they become our grandfathers. And she's saying, because of that, the Black family is alive and well. In the address that she gives to the bishops, she talks about all sorts of statistics that are real statistics that show us the challenges that Black families have. And she doesn't deny the reality or truth of those statistics, but because Black people have a history of creating family and being family to one another, despite those statistics, she could stand up and say the Black family is alive and well, because we still know how to do that. Now, later in her essay in Families, Black and Catholic, Catholic and Black, she also says this. She says that people of any color or culture who have chosen to be family with us are now part of our family. We hope it will help them to get to know us better. Here, I think she's really referencing white Catholics who minister in Black communities, white priests, white sisters. At the time, that was who would have been ministering if there were not Black sisters or Black priests in the community. But now it could be other people as well. So she says, for people of any color or culture who have chosen to be family with us, we hope it will help them to get to know us better. And I felt like that was an important aspect to emphasize, because Sister Thea believed that that was a work that we were all called to know who we are, but to also be interested in one another and to get to know who the other person is. And if you were going to minister well, she believed you had to know the people you were ministering to. You needed to feel connected to them, or you couldn't do it well. Okay, over here on this side, where I guess this is like the title side of the slide, that is not a quote from Sister Thea Bowman. That is not a quote from Sister Thea Bowman. That's my, that's just me putting it in my own words. We are not all alike, and we are not meant to be alike. We're not alike. Now, Sister said, if I begin to believe we are alike, look at what I am going to miss. The richness, beauty, wholeness, and harmony of what God created. Asians are not like Europeans, are not like Africans. Irish are not like Italians, are not like French. Africans are not like Afro-Americans. Black folks are not alike. Folks from Louisiana are not like any other people in the world. Praise God, we are not alike. And then she goes on to address the melting pot. And she says, as for melting and coming out gray, we refuse. If people choose the melting pot, that's fine. The whole idea of the melting pot is unhealthy for people like me. We think it's unhealthy for you too. And here she's talking about, and I think in a very profound way, how in this country we have allowed ourselves to believe that we must blend. But when we blend, we're really becoming the standard of white. We're becoming white. To blend really is to become white. And she's like, you know what? I'm not doing that. I am Black, and I want to stay Black. I'm going to be Black. And trying to be white, because that's what the melting pot is, she says, it's unhealthy. It's not good for me to try to be white. And she's also telling white people, you need to learn who you are. Are you really white? Is that really who you are? Is the melting pot been good for you? She thinks it's unhealthy for you. Sister Thea believed that our differences were evidence that we're created by God, that we're created by God. And she believed that people, all people, should learn to love who they are. Many years ago, we had a Black Catholic History Month lecture at UD on Sister Thea Bowman that was delivered by Dr. C. Vanessa White, who was a great spirituality teacher at Catholic Theological Union, and she knew Sister Thea. She was taught by Sister Thea. And I just remember Dr. White talking about Sister Thea, talking about herself as being beautiful. And she said, you know, a lot of people thought, well, that's you know, prideful. Or when Sister would talk about her beauty, that she was saying, I'm beautiful, but you're not beautiful. Because that's kind of how we're taught to think. She's like, no, that's not what Sister Thea was going for. When Sister Thea talked about her beauty, her giftedness, she was acknowledging God, and that we all need to acknowledge how we are beautiful in and of ourselves. In and of ourselves, we are beautiful. I think for women in our culture, that's really a hard thing to do, because there are standards of beauty that are presented to us, and we strive to achieve them. And in doing that, we never appreciate who we were created to be. And Sister Thea addresses that. There's an essay, a really great essay that I have on the list for you, and the title of that essay is I Am Beautiful, You Are Beautiful. That was one of the teachings of Sister Thea. I am beautiful, you are beautiful. She really believed that children needed to hear that from the beginning, but we need to remind ourselves of that all through our lives, all throughout our lives. It's essential to acknowledging who God has made us to be. Continuing on the theme of young people, in the last part of her life, the last kind of job Sister Thea had, she was asked to lead this office, essentially an office of intercultural, multicultural understanding for the Diocese of Jackson, Mississippi. And so she did a lot of teaching on multiculturalism, anti-culturalism, interculturalism, multi-ethnic understanding. And again, if you're somebody, I think everybody here was in the 80s. If you were teaching in the 80s, you know that multiculturalism was a very important idea that we were seeking to blend into education at that time. And so I think Sister Thea's statement reflects that, but it also reflects, I think, more than just something that was popular for curriculums in that period of time. I think it was a real true belief of hers. She says, if our children are to be adequately prepared for life in a pluralistic, multi-ethnic, multicultural world, they must learn to understand and appreciate the basic religious traditions of the persons with whom they live and work. I think that gets back to the thing about us not being alike and about me being beautiful and you being beautiful. We need to understand and appreciate each other, especially what we believe. What do we believe in our multi-ethnic, multicultural, pluralistic world? And so Sister Thea talked to Catholic educators when she gave workshops about how we could do this, how we could start preparing our young people. And so this was just a list of things that Sister suggested. She said, you know, here's something that Catholic educators can learn. They can learn from Black spirituality. They could learn that it's holistic and celebratory. From Asian traditions, meditation and prayer traditions. From the Hispanic traditions, we could learn about home and family-centered religious education and celebration. From Native Americans or First Nations people, a reverence for all creation. From Muslims, she said, quote, an insistence upon the relationship of religious faith and the active commitment to socio-political involvement. From the Buddhist and Mennonite, she suggested we could learn practices of devoting oneself for a period of service and also of monastic life and youth. She said, these are things that we could teach our children, that more than just we could teach our children, we should teach our children to get them ready for this world. And then finally, some of Sister Thea's ideas about suffering and death. Because I think that probably for most people who know something about Sister Thea, they're people who know about Sister and her teaching, or her teaching on intercultural understanding, because she did a lot of traveling around this country, going to parishes and schools, teaching on these ideas, so people are very aware of that. The other thing I think people are really aware of is how Sister Thea dealt with her own suffering and her eventual death, because there were documentaries and films made about it. So last week I talked about how Sister Thea said that she was going to live until she died, that was what she intended to do. I want to live fully until I die. When I'm sick and don't have the internal resources to pray as I would like, I sing or moan or hum because the songs are so familiar. It's an easy way to pray, to unite myself with God. When I have pain, I find it goes away when I hum or sing. It's a lesson I learned from my people and my heritage. Sister Thea had breast cancer that it was metastatic, so it traveled throughout her body. And in the last year, she was pretty much in a wheelchair. I think that, it's easy to forget because we see medical advances. Seems like medicine's always advancing, and, so we forget about what it was like 20, 30 years ago to live with cancer. It was very hard. It was a lot of serious pain. The treatments have improved so much. Breast cancer no longer is, an automatic death sentence. People live with metastatic cancers for years after being diagnosed. But that wasn't the case when Sister Thea was alive. And so when she talks about using these internal resources to help her to transcend the pain and also to pray and also to unite herself with God, I see I think this is a deep part of Sister Thea's spirituality. Why is there war? Why is there hunger? Why is there pain? Perhaps it's an incentive for struggling human beings to reach out to each other, to help one another, to love one another, and to be blessed and strengthened and humanized in the process. Perhaps it's an incentive to see Christ in our world and to view the work of Christ and to feel the suffering of Christ. I don't despair because I believe God leads me and guides me. And I believe that I can reach out for God's hand. I have received so much love and so many gifts. That's a part of what I hope at this time in my life to be able to share. I want to say to people, just keep on keeping on. For me, that connects back to who she says God is in the beginning of the remarks. She tells us that God is bread when you're hungry, water when you're thirsty, a harbor from the storm. God's a father to the fatherless, a mother to the motherless. God's my sister, my brother, my leader, my guide, my teacher, my comforter, my friend. God's the way maker, the burden bearer, heart fixer, and mind regulator. God's my doctor who's never lost a patient, my lawyer who's never lost a case, my chaplain who never lost a battle. God's my all in all, my everything. That was what allowed Sister Thea to live with cancer with grace and to die with grace. And I think really to be an inspiration, to become a source of inspiration to so many people, to so many people. Sister Thea's cause for canonization was opened in 2018. There is a movement now, some Black Catholics organized in Baltimore. They're calling for the immediate canonization of all 6 of the African Americans whose causes for canonization have been opened. They've sent a letter, I believe, to the Vatican requesting this. I don't know what will come of that request, but I will say this, in the minds and hearts of so many people already, Sister Thea, to them already is a saint. They seek her intercession and her life work and her acceptance of her illness and her commitment to live until she died is what causes them to believe that she's already in God's company, and that is what makes them want to be close to her. So that's what I have for today. I'm happy to take questions, comments, if anybody wants to share an observation. I'm going to show you my last slide. Yeah, you can see that pretty. I hope you can see that. The first several of these books that I have are biographies, and I highlighted in red the text that I used the most for my talks that I gave for you last Friday and today. All of them are very good. I just happened to most recently read Peggy Sklar's Sister Thea Bowman, Do You Hear Me, Church? That is a text that's written for young readers, yet for young readers to learn about Sister Thea Bowman. I also used, in terms of essays, her writings and speeches and interviews, Sister Thea Shooting Star, selected writings and speeches by Celestine Cypress. If you're interested in reading Sister Thea's own writing, I think that's a great place for you to start. But there are also, as I said, wonderful articles about Sister Thea. There are also Almost Home, that's the audio cassette, Living with Suffering and Dying. That's how a lot of people know about Sister Thea. They've seen that or listened to that. Sister Thea, Her Own Story, that's a video about her, and that also has educated a lot of people about who Sister Thea Bowman was. And then at the very bottom, that is the link to Sister Thea's address to the U.S. bishops. So, does anybody want to say something? Does anybody have a question? And I don't know if people who are on the live stream, if they can like submit questions. I don't know if that's happens, but you know, if you're out there watching from your home, if you have a question, I don't know if you want to try to get your question here. I'm happy to answer it if I can. Yes, sir.
Since you asked, I will give an observation, but then I also have a question. So we watched the presentation to the Catholic bishops and also the Mike Wallace interview. So my observation is how persistent she is. And you talked a little bit about I am beautiful and that topic, but during the interview with Mike Wallace, she said, you know, black is beautiful. And she asked him to say that, and he didn't.
He didn't?
He did not the first time. But she was persistent and said, say it, black is beautiful. And finally he said it. I thought her persistence was very impressive in the way she did it, very convincing. But my question, when we listened to the Catholic bishop's presentation, she used the word Catholic Christian, and I'm curious whether that was intentional or that may be just the way she speaks. And I guess part of the reason why I'm asking that question is because in part of that interview, she was talking about how the Catholic Church needed to reach out to the black community. But by using that language, it made me wonder whether she was also saying that other Christian churches should be doing the same. But I guess, you know, I'm confused about that a little bit because I think of a lot of the black evangelical churches where, you know, they've obviously, you know, they seem to have some kind of, you know, reached out to people in a way that maybe Catholic churches haven't.
Okay, well, I'll do my best to answer your question. I will say this, because I teach in the religious studies department, and we have an intro to religious studies class, and now it's called Introduction to Religious and Theological Studies. And I got to tell you, when I first came to UD, teaching mostly Catholic students, at that time, I think we have more religious diversity now, a lot more religious diversity. But I remember Catholic students spoke about Christians. You know, Catholics and Christians. So I think that's And so I would say Catholics are Christians. Catholics are Christians. I think maybe she spoke of Catholic Christians because she wanted to emphasize the that Catholics are part of the wider Christian family. We're a part of the Christian family. That's a possibility. It could be that I don't know, I would say there's probably a specific reason why Sister said it. I'm just giving you my best estimation. And the reason why I say she was probably being very specific because her area in English was rhetoric. So, you pick your words for reasons. There's a reason why you put the words together the way you put the words together. So I'm sure you're right. There's probably some very specific reason why Sister said that, but my best, I don't know. I don't think I've got a good answer for you. Sorry. It's a good observation, though. It's a good observation. Okay, I see someone coming for another question. What amazed me while this gentleman is coming over to ask a question, what amazed me in watching Sister was knowing how sick she was at that time, the power and the energy, and also how strong her voice was when she sang to the bishops, and then when she made them sing with her. And I do think she was talking to them about their responsibility, not about the wider Christian community's responsibility to be in the Black community. She was talking to them about what she felt was the Catholic Church's responsibility to be in the Black community. Yes.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
I wasn't here for the previous presentation. Now, Sister Thea, was she actually a part of a particular order?
Yes, she was. She was a Franciscan Sister of Perpetual Adoration.
Okay, very good. That's what I figured that. I just needed to know which one it was. Okay. One of the things in the comments that I heard you mention about her and the feeling that of how some Black community members are trying to, let's say, be more in the white rather than their Blackness, if I may say that. And it's interesting because in my own experiences, I found that Black people, because I was a service member, and so you had a different community situation, working situation with the members, Black or white, it didn't matter, because you had jobs to do and responsibilities, and there were critical things sometimes that were required, and so you just didn't get into that mindset, if you will, that you're a different person. We were trying to achieve
I think, Sister C, okay, if I feel like I might be understanding where you're going with this.
Well, my point was that I found that most Black people were very, they would make the outreach to us as another person. I'm a Hispanic I'm Mexican American, so I have the understanding of another culturalization. And I found it very interesting in the sharing that we had in some of our programs where the young African, in this case a young African lady, talked about is the sense of being with Black people, having a comfort level, an understanding level that met all of the, how do you call it, the sensible, all of the components of their lives, the shared experiences, the language, the sensitivity that different ethnic groups have about certain ways. All those things gave that person that community of nature. Now, was Sister talking about saying, look, you want to try to preserve that because that has something that's
I think
there.
she was saying we do preserve that. So what you are, if I'm understanding you correctly, what I hear you saying is that in your observation, when Black people were among each other, when we are among each other, we have a sense of ease with one another. We understand. We share this kind of cultural experience. We share some common sensibilities about things. That's culture.
Mm-hmm.
And Sister would say, if we are all honest, yeah, when I'm with a group of Black people, there is a level of comfort that I feel where I can like be myself. And I think white people do too. I don't think a lot will admit that. They'll say, oh, I feel comfortable with everybody. Not really. I think most cultural groups, when you get together with people who share your background, your history, your heritage, your language, your food, there's a sense of joy. Now, Sister says, I do think that this is what Sister is trying to say. I think Sister's saying, we need to know that about ourselves. We need to acknowledge that about ourselves. We need to not be ashamed of it. We need to own it, because when we are like clear about who we are, where we come from, and when we embrace ourselves, when we embrace who we are, that's when we can really reach out to other people. That's when we can really love other people. When we do not have a sense of love and appreciation for ourselves, and I will say this, culturally speaking, again, if you listen to what she says to the bishops, in one part of her address to the bishops, she talks about how, Black people have been talked about. They're too loud. They laugh too much. They're not serious. They're lazy. All these things that are put on them. So you try not to be those things. So I'm going to try to be quiet, and I'm going to try to be neat, and I'm going to try to be really industrious to conform to this thing. Now, some of the things that are said about me are not accurate, but I don't. If I'm in the melting pot mentality, it doesn't matter. I'm just going to try to conform to what white culture tells me is good. And she says, in doing that, we lose ourselves. We don't really know who we are. And that's when it becomes unhealthy for us. And it's become unhealthy for people who are called white too. I think she wants to say to them, because Sister would say, you need to understand yourself as being Irish. You need to understand yourself as being Mexican. You need to understand yourself as being French, whatever it is. You need to love that. You need to learn about it. You need to love it. You need to practice it. You need to share it with other people. When we're all doing that, then we're really being who God created us to be. But when we try to become this one thing, we become gray. Now, personally, I like gray a lot. But I don't want to. But I also don't. I don't want to be I don't want to be in the melting pot. I grew up colorblind. When people said, "Oh, I'm colorblind. I don't see color," I grew up thinking that was good. I do not think that is good now. I do not think that that is good.
Well, thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. I appreciate you hanging in there with me. I think I have one more question. I think I'm going to get another question.
This is the
Hello.
part where Sister Thea was stating that you are different, I'm different, I want us to be different, and we're all different, and that's the beauty in that. She also stated that God is my brother, God is my sister, God is my father, God is my mother. So was she drawing a connection between God's relationship to her and the fact that she was independent, that she had her own mind and her own thoughts and her own thinking, and her oneness with that?
I think so. I think that I think what she was seeking to express was the various ways that God manifests to her. When she talks about God being mother, God being father, God being sister, God being father, God being brother. And again, like I said, I'm not a theology person at all. But I do know that in the history of spirituality, various folks over the generations would speak of God in these ways. Sister Thea just seems to have a very expanded way of thinking, and I think she would say, it's not just me, it's not like me having this expanded thinking. She says, this is my culture, this is my people. Again, I'm not a singer either. I'm not a theologian, I'm not a singer. But this is essentially a song. If Sister Thea was here, she would have sung to you about how God is bread when you're hungry and water when you're thirsty and harbor from the storm and all that. That God is everything, and isn't that what we understand as Catholics?
Yes, definitely.
So I think you could look at it and say, oh, that's a very Catholic understanding, and you're right. You could look at it and say, it's a very Black understanding, and you're right. Because when she starts off I was brought up in the old time church, the old time religion, and yeah, I can remember that too. I'm from a what would I call it? I'm from an interreligious family. My mother converted to Catholicism after college. Her brother was in college when she finished, and he was studying to be a Baptist minister. And my mother converted to Catholicism and helped my grandmother to put her brother through the seminary. So I have Baptist roots going way back and preaching roots going way back, although I'm not a preacher. But Sister Thea says I am, so I guess I am. But I guess what I'm trying to say is, growing up, we'd go sometimes after we went to Mass, we'd go with our grandmother to the Baptist church. And we had a fictive kin grandmother, Granny Maud, who lived next door to us, who was AMEZ. And I loved going with Granny Maud to her church. And you'd hear those people, they'd talk about God being the way maker, the mind regulator, the way out of no way. That's how Black people talk about God. So if you're wherever you're standing, you can see the various influences on Sister Thea and what she shares with us in explaining to us who God is. So yes, I would say yes to your question.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anybody else? No? Okay, well, thank you all so much for coming. If you weren't here last week, the people who were here last week, I gave them Sister Thea prayer cards. These are the prayers for Sister Thea's canonization. And so if you weren't here, I'd like to give prayer cards to you. So I'm going to do that, and I'm finished. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cecilia Moore. And please look forward to announcements about the next series. Most probably it will happen during Lent. We hope to make it about Francis of Assisi, but we'll see. But thank you and good night. God bless.